And what it is that I'm talking about is sustainable cinema. So, well, when we speak about zero waste, sometimes we just look it from our own perspective, okay, from the person perspective and our individual actions. But we also, at some point, we need to look at it from the outside perspective and the impact we might have with our acts that directly or indirectly we are supporting or being part of. So we are really aware and we all know that the film industry is quite big and it's huge everywhere you look. But have we ever stopped to think the impact that it's having? So I'm not referring just the last part, the part that we can see, like the cinemas or also the big galas that are being celebrated for the releasings, but also the whole process. So the production of a movie is really big, and sometimes it become really technical, and some of us might not know so much about it. But there are a lot of people behind really involved, and at some point we also need to be aware of what is happening in that industry. So this is a topic that we are going to speak today with our guest Roberto, and directly from Chile, with his session From 10,000 Tons of CO2 to Zero, a journey to reduce the film industry footprint on Earth. A really interesting session that we are going to have right now in our main stage. So let me see if we have Roberto around here. So yes, he's ready. So please, Roberto, you can now ask to share your camera with us. Okay, here, see you. Let me give you space with me here. Hello.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Good, and you, how are you doing?
Super, enjoying the festival, been like watching since yesterday, and I'm just like filled with joy with the opportunity of being here and sharing a little bit of what we love to do, and so hopefully inspire others to do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen you really active in our chat, so that's a good sign. Yes, that well, we have you there. So I really like the topic that you are bringing us today. And well, when we met, I was really amazed and shocked at the same time. No, at first of all the areas behind a simple movie and the impact that it can have. So since that time, well, we have already collaborated together. But since that moment, I really have never stopped thinking about this topic. And yes, I really looking to know more of it and see also like what is happening there, what is the industry doing. So I hope also you can clarify today a few of those questions.
Yeah, perfect. I can take
it. Okay, so if you want, you can share your screen now.
Yeah, hold on.
Okay. Okay, so it seems like it's loading now. There it is. Nice. So I leave you now. The stage is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Coral.
Thank you, Roberto.
So I go for it. I'm Roberto. I am part of an ecological arts collective with my brother Juan Pablo. We are called FEN, and we are focusing on how to make productions, how to make any kind of art production, principally filmmaking productions with sustainable practices and sustainable technologies. So our aim is not only to tell stories that focus on telling like inspire things about like ecological conflicts or what's not, but also through doing our productions more sustainable. We started then back in 2014 with the idea of finding sustainable ways of making films. So I'm gonna go with that, but first I'm gonna answer the question that why we would choose to go with film. So throughout the 21st century and up until this day, film has taken humanity for a spin. This art, together with music, painting, and other classic artistic expressions, it has helped us to understand how our culture works, and it has they're the kind of like the new books. They show us like different perspectives from different cultures, from different parts of the world. Um, so there's a lot of like this kind of like cultural shock that you can get from filmmaking, and kind of like you alleviate that with getting like an insight into these worlds. I remember, for example, when I watched when I went to the cinema for the first time, I watched The Lion King, and I remember like being up in my seat, like just like super excited to see like Simba fighting the bad guys, and just going through the whole like emotional like river that that movie was for me. And I was very clear from that moment on that I wanted to tell stories that way. I wanted to kind of make people feel emotions and feel connected to characters, and kind of giving a sense of purpose to others, basically. So movies transport us, they can hack our feelings towards others. They've influenced our perception of love, abundance, family, luck, nature, and all life in all forms. And so naturally, movies have also brought a great awareness into our relationship as humans with nature, so our ecology. Um, so here we're gonna go like a run through like how how film has always been in our lives and has kind of like inspire us in a way. So as children, for example, like we will connect with movies like The Lion King, where they will like use kind of like fables, animals to tell stories of like coming of age stories of going through a conflict and becoming and growing and just the experience of life itself. And with this frame, since it was always like kind of like they are cartoons, we kind of like are a bit like that this is not us, so we get these like really easy lessons from it. Like we're more open to learning from films when they're like through this kind of lens of fantasy. Basically, we have like very good movies here that are dealing with topics of environmental, for example Bambi, with the kind of like the growing process of this deer when her mother got killed by a hunter. We got Wally, for example, which is yeah, we all know it is this robot that stay on Earth to clean up after us. Then, for example, we have like all these movies that are they're like have this like really pessimistic vision of the future, and there's always like this hero who's trying to change things. So there's a lot of like post-apocalyptic movies. There's a lot of like movies that deal with concepts of like, for example, like water scarcity or like natural disasters or like possible like nuclear kind of attacks and things like that. Um, Most of them have like a very futuristic approach, and they're always like kind of like putting the question of like, are we being like rightful to Earth and to humanity? Um, so then there's like a lot of like these kind of movies, for example, like we see here, Avatar, Nausicaa, and In the Rain, that they show us like these characters that go through a transformation. For example, like you will see in Avatar, there was this like character who's the guy who eventually becomes the Avatar, and he's like a colonizer basically. It's like the same story that we had in Pocahontas and in many movies before that. They call it Story About Colonialism. It's kind of like a new genre, but yeah, basically like we have all these stories about like, you know, changing sides and learning, okay, we're not doing things right, we're not really connecting with nature, and we are just like taking things, and there's this like really like extra activism like attitude towards it. So then you see these characters like going through that process of change basically. And then we have, for example, documentaries. We all love to watch documentaries, and we definitely probably we've all been in the position that we didn't know about something like specifically, and then we watched this documentary, and it felt like our life just changed completely. I mean, the stuff like, for example, like the genetically modified foods or waste management, fossil fuel industry, fast fashion, lack of climate and social justice on race, gender, Aboriginal people, and more. There have been so many documentaries putting also solutions, showing the problem and also giving you solutions. And probably like when people think about ecological filmmaking, this is the first thing they think about. They think, oh yeah, that documentary that tell me like, you know, not to pollute or something like that. But yeah, as you could see from before and think about it, when you think about it, like ecology has been present in even in fiction films and in films throughout entire history. By the way, there's here one of the movies that you can see is 2040. I really recommend you to watch this movie. It's the best movie I've seen this year. It's a very inspiring story, and it's basically like focused on the solutions, which is what we need to focus right now. So then we think about, okay, we have like all these really good movies that they're like very conscious. You know, they consciously had an agenda, some more obvious than others, but in the end, they all had the spark to start a conversation on environmental awareness. However, looking back on this main source for awareness and consciousness, the film industry, like any other industry in its time, eventually care more for expansion and economical gain than anything else. And I remember I'm a filmmaker and I graduated in 2012, and we started having this concern about like the climate crisis growing exponentially. And we had realized, or I had realized back then, that I was gonna become part of an industry that was also like as polluting as like fast fashion could be, or as like even oil refining could be. And when I realized of that, it kind of like I felt like a little bit put off. You know, I read this information that like in Los Angeles, for example, the Hollywood industry polluted more than the clothing and hotel industries, becoming just second to fuel refining. I mean, like that is something that I wouldn't expect, or like I didn't know in the beginning, and then I eventually I realized. So we're gonna talk about the film industry's carbon footprint. So we're gonna first like tackle basically the conflict. We're gonna tackle the problem, and then we're gonna go through ways how we can solve that. So creating a film requires a multitude of resources from its first phase all the way until post-production. In pre-production, previous to the actual shooting of the movie, for example, paper is king. As you can see there in a picture, there's like this guy with a stack of scripts, basically. And so basically, it can also happen that a script gets printed multiple times for some person, as this can vary and go through different versions before the final one. Scripts become personal, so everyone has one. Besides scripts, call sheets for the crew, visual references, art folder, and other documents join the excessive need for paper in the film industry. And although today everything is first and foremost in its digital version, these practices, like in any other industry, they are hard to change until somebody really brings it up, like in a very passionate way. Another picture that we see over there, we see this like motorhomes. You know, this is like a classic thing when you go to a big Hollywood like movie set. You'll see like all these motorhomes and all these like big trucks filled with equipment that goes from point A to point B to wherever they need to go. You know, naturally using fossil fuels to run themselves. One thing that like I'm completely against stuff, and I'm sorry for the stars and these like big movie stars that we see, is that like since the 1920s, you know, when we created Hollywood created the star system, where like you had actors, you know, and they will have like their own motor home, you know, so like they had their own bathroom, and you know, you will have like all these vehicles and more and more and more and more vehicles just to like give this kind of like pleasures, you know. The film industry from its beginning has always kind of like seen itself kind of like a little bit as a luxury. So they also kind of act as luxury, and they have this kind of like very abundant way of like dealing with their work, basically. So for example, there here when you see this film roll over there, which looks like it's completely burned, when you go to film school, this is like one of the first things that you learn is like beware film rolls, you know, because they're like super inflammable. Like you could burn a whole building just by lighting one of these. Naturally, because of the plastic and chemicals involved in this analog medium, Besides, film must be developed to view the photos, which requires a lot of water, paper, and toxic chemicals. The use of film remained the dominant form of cinematography until the early 21st century, when luckily digital formats began to take over. Like we all saw, like in early 2000, they were all talking about HD, you know, and digital cameras became more normal. And so then you will just store like your entire movie in just like this little card. Back, back in, you know, like before 2000, like everything was just like stacks of film rolls, and then people would like cut them and go through them. And if that gets like, if any kind of fire goes close to that, like that's the end of it. So regardless of the fact that like now digital has become more common, and at about 70 to 80% of all films today are made digital, especially all indie films are probably made digitally as well. Regardless of that, until today, sadly, some really, really, really good filmmakers are like Christopher Nolan, who did like Interstellar and Inception, or like for example the really popular one, Quentin Tarantino. They completely refuse to go digital. They are like Puritans, you know. They want to keep this like film thing going, and they want to pile up the stock, and they refuse to shoot in digital. But that's also changing slowly. The catering, you see this styrofoam cup. Um, so catering is one of the probably one of the areas in the film production where it's the easiest to become sustainable. And it's because it has gone so far on commodities that problems like the excess of styrofoam cups and plastic water bottles are like on everyone's mind. So yeah, now like the people are like kind of like catering services, which are in charge of feeding the crew and feeding the actors and feeding everybody on set. They're paying more attention to like create less plastic waste, basically, because like I've worked many times in different like maybe like bigger film productions, and you can see like for example like they will bring coffee or water in like plastic cups, and like the electrician will be, you know, working hard the entire day putting lights up and what's so not, and they will come bring like a glass of water. He will drink this glass of water, put it in the trash. 2 hours later, new glass of water, new tray full of glass of water. And this is everybody on set is taking these glasses of water, and everybody's just putting them on the trash. You will rarely see somebody like writing their name in this plastic cup, as I was doing it back then, because I thought it was like just horrific. Um, so yeah, the list of harmful practices towards the environment of a film production can go on, and it can go completely unchecked. From keeping studio lights on for days to the several ways of making special effects, most times in real locations. So like they will blow up things like in the middle of nowhere. Remember those climate change movies that we saw before, that we were talking a little bit about them? Like there's a lot of explosions there. Like people had to blow things up probably, and this is all of course taking a toll on the environment. So the film industry so far has failed in the constant of living places the same, like it has failed in living places the same way that they found them in the beginning. Uh, Naturally, we found a lack of alignment between the ecological themes in these films and the production that underwent to tell these stories. So we ask ourselves, is it sustainable production possible? So when back in 2013 we started writing, I started writing my thesis on on ecological filmmaking and what has been done to reduce our footprint, what can we do, etc. One of the most interesting things that I came across was this whole like idea of carbon offset movies. There was this really big movies between 2005 and 2007. You can see The Day After Tomorrow, Syriana, the documentary Al Gore documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. These movies, once they were made, they basically bought carbon like bonuses. They invested in renewable energy. They invested in the planting of trees through different companies in order to offset their emissions. So they first calculated their emissions, and then once they got like a total at the end of the movie, they like cashed in and brought up some money to the table, and they were able to mitigate their emissions through supporting like sustainable technologies or practices. Now, I felt, and we felt back then, because we started this with my brother, like that wasn't enough. That, I mean, it's cool that you want to do this, that you want to kind of like mitigate your emissions by doing this, but the problem with that is that like all the people that worked in The Day After Tomorrow, all the people that worked in Syriana, George Clooney or whatever, like Jake Gyllenhaal, they didn't really learn about what was the process of actually making sustainable films. Like there wasn't any input in I guess like hardcore recycling or like on using solar energy. There wasn't none of that. It was just kind of like, okay, we're done with the movie, let's do something nice and like mitigate our emissions. So although we feel like that's a good way to kind of like complement your actions as a filmmaker by the end of the production, that is just like, it's like the last thing that you do. That is the last way that you kind of find to get like a zero waste, zero carbon emission film. You start from the beginning. You need to work from the beginning, and you need to involve everybody around you in this process. So yeah, for example, like just to give you a little bit like an idea of like how much like and how much like a film could emit in terms of like CO2, and this is from where the title of this presentation comes. So The Day After Tomorrow, this really big movie about climate change with Jake Gyllenhaal running around New York, which is was gonna freeze and it's crazy. There's explosions and there's cold everywhere. But yeah, that movie generated 10,000 tons of CO2 in its making. Of course, this is like a really big budget movie, and not all movies are generating this much. This is kind of like, it's like the extreme how far, like how polluting films can actually be. This is like the extreme of how polluting we can be. And it was actually the director of this film, Roland Emmerich, who in the end, from his money, he managed to mitigate the emissions of the film through the carbon offset projects. Now, other films, like more smaller films, but that still make it to theaters, that will still be watching and talk about, they will mitigate, they will probably like, there's studies, there's one really good from the We Are Albert, I can type this later. They recently wrote this Screen New Deal, kind of like the Green New Deal, but based on film. And in their studies, they find that like a one tentpole film, so like one classical, just like film that we will be watching, romantic comedy or fantasy or whatever, generates like around 2,840 CO2 tons of CO2. It's almost 3,000. That is like, so to put this in context, like you will need 3,700 acres of forest to sequester that carbon in a whole year. So yeah, that's quite the weight to change there. So we concluded that to make an ecological film, we needed to do much more. We needed to like work all of our actions to just change completely the industry and start from the beginning. So for that, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna go through department, and I'm gonna tell you what can be done in each department in order to reduce your carbon emissions. So every film starts with an idea. The screenwriting process, this idea turns into a script. And that is the part that we talked earlier about, where all this paper gets used. You know, you're printing different versions of your script, you're going through it, and naturally there's like a lot of paper that comes into it. This we can easily avoid by going completely digital. This is like how we do it. We've worked in little short films. We're working now currently in a new film, and we're just going completely digital. We support and we kind of how you say, we want for the people that we work with to have this kind of like digital collaboration, constant digital collaboration. Then in sense of the direction, well, the story that you're gonna tell is always personal. But in our case, we always have elements of ecology or elements of sustainability. In our case, we always want to talk about these things. So yeah, that's kind of like basically in that area. Then we got. Okay, so before I go on, there's a lot of things that you can like do here. For example, like I wrote this because it's like not many people know it, but like if you're writing like ideas and what's not, and you have to print them, do use Century Gothic font because it uses like 30% less ink than all fonts, like the Arial, the classic Arial. So it's like, yeah, you'll be using this ink, which is always good for the environment. So one of the most important things about sustainable production, naturally, is the ecological production itself. So in this case, the key thing to do a sustainable production is to measure the true impact of your production previously. So you kind of like see, okay, we're gonna have to travel here, we're gonna go to the north of Chile and then come back, we're gonna need like this amount of fossil fuel, we're gonna need like to do this scene in the night with a lot of light, this amount of light, and you can kind of like go through all the process, okay, to from the start, like kind of like get ready for it and find the solutions in order to have a sustainable production. The ecological producer is also the person who's in charge of like having these options for the rest of the crew, you know. So they will focus in making in partnering with the initiatives and with entities that there are also like based on sustainability. So one of the key things that the ecological production will have to do is that they will have to provide the production with sustainable green energy. Partner with like a solar panel seller, or like just have a base which is like completely renewable energy powered. Also setting up different places for recycling. Yeah, so it comes like all this work. It's a previous work. Before shooting, you have to kind of just make sure that you have all these things in order to make the production work. So let me just get a little bit of help here. It's very strange to just be talking like in front of a screen because I'm not even watching you guys or anything. But I'm gonna imagine that you're all smiling and learning a lot. So, well, as I said, some basics of the production team is to establish recycling bins. It can be done with solar energy, then that's with or with wind energy or renewable energy. Now, like this has to be like a per basically sustainable production schedule in order to make this all work. So like Gantt, Excels, that's how it's gonna go. Then we have the cinematography department. In the cinematography department, this is like also has to be supported by if the production can give that, then that's great. There's a lot of things that can be done here. Yet, for example, this department, which is in charge of cameras and in charge of lighting, they will also have to make decisions in which equipment they will use. And then again, what's important here is to keep it digital. To don't go like it wouldn't be like a sustainable production with film. It just wouldn't work. It will be too much to mitigate later. Then there's also like using LED lights instead of Fresnel lights, which are the classic studio lights. Just go LED. They consume like 75% less than a Fresnel light. So you have to also kind of like have a director of photography who is trained in making decisions according to like low energy lighting systems. We love movies that don't use lights at all, like they will just be done with natural light, and this is actually like a big trend in filmmaking. Of course, in the daytime, if you're outside, you won't be using a light. You don't need to. You can just be using different ways of bouncing that light with like like white blankets and what's on that. So yeah, there's like many ways you can also participate in making sustainable production here. Then there's the art department. Here's where it gets very fun, because the art department is in charge of like supporting the overall look of the film, the design, the building, decorating sets, creating costume, etc. Here you can really dive deep in the 7 R's. Some people say they're 5, some people say they're 10 R's. We're gonna stick with 7. Reduce, reuse, repurpose, repair, return, and rot. So yeah, I mean, it's basically, if you're gonna make a scenography, you have to think about how you're gonna make it in order that that scenography can be lately used for something else. So you can repurpose basically. It's like you have to design for deconstruction. As you design for construction, you also have to design for deconstruction. That's gonna allow you to have a much longer life for all these sets and for all this decoration that comes into this production. This department is also in charge of costume design. Here is where we can avoid fast fashion, and here's where we can learn a lot from like the other talks about like fast fashion and how we can support, secondhand stores or fairly done sustainable fashion and so on. Then we got the sound designing and post production. Then again, it comes to staying digital, to understanding the use of energy. If we have a solar powered production, this is no problem. This all happens digitally. So as long as you're charging with the sun, you're good to go. And also like keep on mind that the equipment that you want to have is all rechargeable battery space. So for example, like if you're gonna need like do usually like when you have a big one of these big boom mics, they also have batteries, so you will make sure that those are rechargeable. Then catering is a big one where you can make a lot of things also, kind of like with art direction. I mean, as I mentioned before, avoid plastic, keep recycling stations, compost, very important. Compost everything. Like we have to avoid entirely create any kind of waste. We wanna become zero waste with this whole project. So if you have like leftover foods, you can there's ways today that you can like contact certain organizations in order to have this for like let's say put the refrigerators, so the cutters have refrigerators, and then they can later refrigerate this food, and then they can contact other initiatives so they can pick up that food for free, and you can donate that food because it's not gonna go anywhere else. And then we have, for example, like if there's this like ultimate trash that you can't get rid of because it has this and has that, there's some stuff that is kind of harder to recycle because it's like a mix of aluminum and plastic and just a bunch of things. Then you have the option of creating an eco brick. These are really cool solutions. They are used a lot here in South America, where you can like just fill up these plastic bottles with trash until like they literally become like a plastic brick, and you can make houses out of them. You can see there's a house there made out of eco bricks. This is called like bioconstruction, actually. Very interesting. But yeah, everybody on set, their own water bottle, not plastic. Everybody just keep their own cups and their own way so they can refill it with water, with coffee, or whatever they need. Then we're getting to transport. This is a big topic, and probably like the place where we have to make the most work, because we are also going in pair and in parallel with the technologies we have available today. We have all technologies available, but so far, yeah, I mean, if you can have renewable energy powered like trucks like this van over there, or like these generators, then do use that. If you can encourage your team to use bicycles and go from set to set through bicycles and reward them for that, then that will definitely make a difference. Join the revolution. And in the worst case, like you have to use diesel, which it can happen, especially in Hollywood productions. Then go for biodiesel. So yeah, that will be here in transport. There's a lot of things to do there. And then getting to the end of this presentation, this distribution, you might think, okay, but yeah, like what, I'm making this like environmental film. What am I gonna do with it? Like how do I have support? Do I have support to kind of like get windows of vision for this film? Yeah, there is a lot of sustainable like environmental film festivals all around the world, in Europe, in South America, in the United States, and they're all about telling the stories and showing these kind of stories. We have Planet in Focus in Canada, San Francisco Screen Film Festival, Cine Ambiente from Italy. So there are all these windows for you to show your films. There's even prizes that they give for sustainable endeavor and you reducing your emissions. And yeah, also naturally, if this since it's gonna be like a digital film that you're gonna probably send it over the internet, and that's gonna be the way that you're gonna distribute it. So is a sustainable production possible? Yes, it is. And that's what we work with here in FEN, and we believe that this is an opportunity for creating new technologies, new jobs. I mean, there's so many things you can do. We can even like create, you know, I mean, for example, like we already created kind of like different crew members in order to make sure that we really get through the production being as sustainable as possible and finding ways to reduce our emissions. By the end of the film, you can find you can do community-based interventions. You can meet. You can go and plant trees with your entire crew. You can have like environmental consultancy meeting artists, and from there you have like a whole new power of people and like of a whole new profession basically. So we believe that this is the future. There's already things happening. We believe that we need to push more, like with anything else, in terms of creating a better future for all of us and for the Earth itself. So that leads me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
Roberto. It has been really amazing. And well, I think like you bring us this positive message. So yes, it's possible. And we really hope that the future shows it. So we're running out of time a bit, but don't worry, for those who have a few questions for Roberto, I invite you now to go to the sessions because Roberto is going to be there with Juan Pablo and they can answer you all of your questions. So thank you so much, Roberto. It has been really amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.